Look at the hand-cut sandstone blocks of the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in western West Virginia. This building covers 9 acres of floor space. Its central clock tower reaches 200 feet into the sky. It is a masterpiece of Gothic architecture, built in 1858 in a town of only a few hundred people. The official record says this was a hospital for the poor. But look at the windows. Look at the thousands of uniform openings carved into solid stone with a precision that defies the tools of the mid-19th century. Why would a frontier government spend 25 years building a palace for people they considered social outcasts? The massive insane asylum boom of the 1880s is not a story of medical progress. It is a story of a global incarceration system. Was this building really constructed in 1858, or was it inherited? Comment below if you have one of these massive Kirkbride buildings in your own town. Subscribe now so you do not miss the next layer of this investigation. The official story is clear. Dr. Thomas Story Kirkbride developed a plan for the humane treatment of the mentally ill. He believed that grand architecture, natural light, and fresh air could cure the mind. Between 1850 and 1890, dozens of these massive palaces for the insane appeared across the United States. They were built with the finest materials and the most advanced technology of the era. Governments claim they were simply prioritizing the welfare of their most vulnerable citizens. They tell us it was an era of unprecedented altruism and enlightenment. That is the official story. It is logical, it is documented, and it ignores the physical reality of the buildings. The massive insane asylum boom of the 1880s requires us to believe an economic impossibility. In 1858, West Virginia was a wilderness. There were no skilled masons, no infrastructure, and no budget for a project of this scale. Yet, workers supposedly cut thousands of tons of local stone by hand. They moved these blocks without heavy machinery. They finished a structure larger than the United States Capitol for a population that did not exist yet. Does a government build a palace for the broken before they build a school for the healthy? The pattern is not limited to West Virginia. Look at the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts. Look at the Buffalo State Asylum in New York. Both were built during the same short window. Both feature the same colossal footprint and the same advanced stone masonry. Both buildings appeared in regions that were supposedly recovering from civil unrest and economic collapse. The geographic spread shows a coordinated effort to establish massive, high-security compounds across every state. The only framework that accounts for this without contradiction is the Great Reset. These buildings were not constructed in the 1880s. They were excavated and repurposed. The massive insane asylum boom of the 1880s was a seizure of existing Tartarian infrastructure. The ruling class did not build these fortresses to house the sick. They found them. They cleared the mud from the lower levels and put a sign on the door. If there was a global catastrophic event in the mid-19th century, the survivors would be the greatest threat to the new narrative. People who remembered the old world had to be silenced. They were not patients. They were witnesses. The asylum system provided a legal mechanism to disappear thousands of adults without a trial. You did not need to commit a crime to be sent to Weston or Danvers. You only had to disagree with the new history. Research by alternative historians like John Levi points to the orphan trains of the same era. While the children were sent to the frontier to be re-educated, the adults were sent to these palaces. The massive surge in insanity diagnosis in the late 1800s matches the timing of the Great Reset perfectly. Mainstream history says people were committed for religious excitement or novel reading. These are not medical conditions. They are descriptions of people who refuse to stop talking about the past. Look at the technology inside these buildings. They featured centralized steam heat and complex ventilation systems before most homes had running water. They had high-vaulted ceilings and resonance chambers that resemble energy infrastructure. Mainstream science calls these architectural flourishes. But a resonance chamber in a hospital serves no medical purpose. It serves a technological purpose. The Kirkbride Plan emphasized moral treatment. This involved separating people into wings based on their behavior. It was a classification system. The massive footprint allowed for the segregation of thousands of individuals. It was a human processing center. The high walls and remote locations were not for the protection of the patients. They were for the isolation of the truth. Consider the water therapy rooms found in almost every 19th century asylum. They tell us doctors used ice baths and high-pressure hoses to calm the insane. But the plumbing in these rooms is industrial in scale. It looks less like a medical treatment and more like a cooling system for machinery. Were these buildings originally power plants that were later fitted with beds and bars? Mainstream historians admit that many of these buildings were overbuilt. They were designed for populations that didn't arrive for decades. This is an admission of inherited infrastructure. You do not build a 9-acre palace for 10 people. You occupy a 9-acre palace because it is already standing. The massive insane asylum boom of the 1880s was the final phase of the cleanup. The records of the construction are suspiciously thin. We have thousands of photos of the buildings, but almost none of the construction process. We have no photos of the thousands of masons needed to cut the stone. We have no records of where the millions of dollars in funding came from. The archives are filled with reports, but the engineering drawings are missing. The most unsettling detail is the cemetery system. Almost every major asylum has a graveyard with thousands of nameless markers. People went into these buildings and never came out. Their identities were erased. Their stories were buried in the mud with the old world. If these were hospitals, where are the discharge records for the cured? The impossibility moment is found in the foundations. Look at the lower levels of the Trans-Allegheny Asylum. There are windows that are entirely below ground level. They are framed in stone and perfectly finished. No architect builds a window that looks into solid dirt. These windows were once at street level. The buildings were partially buried by the same event that reset our timeline. The new rulers simply built new roads at a higher elevation and turned the ground floors into basements. They took the survivors, locked them inside these ruins, and told the world they were crazy. This implies that our entire 19th century history is a fabrication. If the asylums were re-education centers, then the Enlightenment was a forced memory wipe. The grand buildings of the 1800s are the remains of a civilization we are not allowed to remember. If this one thing is true, then we must look at our universities and our capitals. Were they also inherited? Were they also filters for the population? We must lead our logic where the evidence points. The massive insane asylum boom of the 1880s was the foundation of the modern world. It was the birth of the state's power to define what is sane and what is real. If you can be declared insane for remembering the truth, then the truth is effectively dead. We cannot prove exactly what happened inside those stone walls. The records were burned in accidental fires in the early 20th century. We do not have the original maps of the underground tunnels. The absence of these documents is the pattern. The truth was not lost. It was removed. We only have the buildings themselves. Return to the stone blocks of Weston. Touch the sandstone. Ask yourself if a group of frontier settlers built this with hammers and chisels, or if they simply walked into a city they didn't understand and decided to use it as a cage. The massive, insane asylum boom of the 1880s left behind monuments that the official story cannot explain. The windows are still there. The spires are still there. The silence of the nameless graves is still there. Does the official story of humane treatment actually explain the 9-acre stone palace in front of you? What happened to the people who refused to forget? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe these were hospitals, or were they something much darker? We are going to examine the Great Exhibition of 1851. It was not a fair. It was a liquidation sale. The record is still there. You just have to look.